Bill Gates gives his report card on how Australia went during COVID, climate change and nuclear energy. National security and Medicare to be a focus for the government in 2023, and more than 1 billion people in China catch COVID. It's Tuesday, the 24th of January, 2023. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, I won't take too much time because we've got a lot to get through today, but I just want to make a very quick mention of a review that we received on Apple Podcasts. And it's such a nice review. This is from somebody by the name of MJ Mir. And they basically say, I've been an avid listener for about 12 months now. Pretty clear why it's the most listened to business podcast in Australia. Balanced, objective reporting of the news with considered insight, minus the hype, doom and gloom of mainstream media. Keep up the good work. How nice is that?
What a great review. What a great way to start the show.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And that's from MJ Mir. That's on Apple Podcasts. So if you'd like to do something similar, you can use similar words, even copy and paste if you want. Head to Apple Podcasts and do that. We really appreciate hearing from listeners like that. Anyway, Sean, I mentioned we have a stack to get through, so let's not delay. You've got an interview coming up a little bit later on. Zeb Rice, who is the founding partner of King River Capital. This is a great one for anyone interested in crypto.
Yes. Now, just occasionally I do interviews with people and halfway through I just have to concede that I don't really understand what I'm talking about.
Oh, like I do with you most days. Yeah.
The great thing about Zeb is he really puts some really technical issues into English. And this is one of those interviews. And I said, Zeb, I'm kind of with you mostly, but not fully. So he goes back and helps me explain things like cryptos and just the fact that the collapse of FTX last year gave cryptos a bad name, but really had nothing to do with cryptocurrencies themselves. We talk about Web 3.0. We talk about how to invest in tech startups and tech companies. It's just a really fascinating interview, and I learnt plenty.
Yeah, it's a really good one. It's coming up later on. The main story this morning, though, Sean, Microsoft founder Bill Gates is in Sydney at the moment. And yesterday, he told a Lowy Institute audience that including China in international trade was as important as coordinating transitions away from fossil fuels.
Yes, he said it was sad that the world was evolving such that people won't want to rely on China over the next decade or so, and that will create inefficiencies. China's rise is a big win for the rest of the world because of its contribution to the global economy and technological innovation. He said politicians that want policies that hurt China have a lose-lose mentality, as it would slow the global economy, the invention of cancer drugs, and climate change progress. Mr. Gates said the rate of innovation out of the US remains very high despite political divisions, and that political polarisation he blamed on news outlets for eroding trust in public institutions. It was very far-reaching. He spoke on all sorts of things yesterday, Bill Gates.
Yeah, the thing is, he's always willing to voice his opinion, and he was candid on a whole bunch of topics yesterday.
Yeah, he sure was. He said it was too late for the world to prevent temperatures from rising 1.5 degrees, so the focus should be on preventing a 2.5 degree rise. Gates, of course, is one of the world's richest men. He said he was investing in local startup Rumen 8, which is also backed by Andrew Forrest, to help develop seaweed feed for cattle, which theoretically reduces their ethane emissions. We all know where we're going there, Michael. Gates said the Russia-Ukraine war had diverted the world's attention from poverty and climate change. He's open to nuclear technology because it's not dependent on the weather and it's clean energy. However, he warned that while making nuclear energy was cheap and safe, the science behind it wasn't fully clear. On COVID, he said no country deserved an A, but he did commend Australia because it scaled up quarantine and vaccinations.
Sean, I really, really love how quickly you moved on just then from seaweed and methane emissions from cattle. It feels like you have learnt from the past because we went down that path once in the past, and I seem to recall I proposed the use of corks on an industrial scale.
I do believe so. We have talked about that story at some point last year, and that was your solution to methane issues for cattle, which I think probably explains why I didn't pause when I went through it this time.
Yep, just move on very, very quickly. You have learned. Sean, what was going on in the local market yesterday?
Well, look, there hasn't been much good news for buy now, pay later operators for months and months, really. But yesterday, Sezzle came out and said revenue last month was 16% higher than a year earlier, and the group is profitable. In fact, it was profitable for the second month in a row last December. That sent its share price up 37%. Also, the share price of Block Group, which bought Afterpay about 12 months ago, jumped nearly 6% after a strong session for tech stocks on Wall Street over the weekend. And Zipco, remember Zipco? That was up more than 20% yesterday. Finally, some good news for those guys. Lithium stocks, particularly Pilbara Minerals and Liontown Resources, also did well on the back of a series of investment bank upgrades for the sector. Pilbara's share price jumped 13% on Friday. It was up another 6% yesterday. Liontown was up 7% yesterday. Overall, the S&P ASX 200 finished the day up slightly to 7,457 points. It's a bit disappointing, given the rally on Wall Street over the weekend. But, Michael, remember the local market has been travelling very well all year. You know that because you've been listening to every word I say, yes?
Sorry, what?
Yeah, exactly. The tech stocks did best yesterday, while the energy companies also fared well. Utility stocks and healthcare companies were among the worst performers. There is plenty of corporate news around. Diversified miner South32 warned that first half operating unit costs were expected to be in line or below forecasts. That everyone likes lower costs. Its share price jumped 1.3%. Oil and gas explorer Karoon Energy jumped more than 7% after it announced an increase in reserves at its Santos Basin concession in Brazil. Gold digger Amelius Resources, it's been in the wars a bit. It fell after saying it had deferred an open pit extension at its Edna May operations in Western Australia due to higher costs. And finally, Michael, online retailer Booktopia said it will cut as many as 40 jobs in a bid to rein in costs. Now, Michael, Booktopia. I know the company well. I used it only recently to order an advanced copy of your new book.
Yes, fantastic segue. Usually I dread the moment when you mention my name with a question mark at the end because you're going to ask me something that has required me to pay attention. But I'm happy to answer this one off the cuff. It's called How to Be Remembered, and it is coming out on the 1st of March. And it is a novel, and what I would suggest would be you could go directly to Booktopia, or you can go to michaelthompson.net.au and have a look and order it there, because the countdown is on. We're about 5 weeks now till the book comes out. Very exciting, for me at least.
Very exciting. It was sort of some trepidation for someone like me. I know there's a character called Sean in it. I would like to know what that person's like. I know our colleague Adam Lang, it's trepidation on his part too, because we're both basically waiting to see whether we've been written into the story in some negative manner.
Whether there's any form of character assassination in there.
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, Adam, unfortunately, was cut during one of the editing rounds of editing with the publisher, Allen and Unwin. But Sean made it through and is more interesting than ever, shall we say.
Excellent.
So, yes, head to michaelthompson.net.au if you'd like. Now, we have veered slightly away from markets.
We have.
International markets. Has the Lunar New Year slowed things down?
Yes, well, it certainly limited trading in the region yesterday. It's also impacted commodities. Oil prices fell back a touch yesterday, with Brent crude trading around $87 a barrel. Gold's around $1,930 an ounce. There is some respite in energy prices, and coal's down to $350 a tonne. Okay, that's still high by historical measures at least, but it's more than 20% below its peak of September last year. Maybe not so good for the coal companies, but good for coal users. And finally, Michael, the Aussie dollar is trading around 70 US cents.
All right, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says national security will be a key focus for the May federal budget, though he wouldn't confirm reports that the government will spend up to $1 billion on sea mines and high-tech underwater weapons.
Yes, the Sydney Morning Herald yesterday reported that Australia will acquire sea mines from a European supplier for somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion as a significant deterrent to potential aggressors. Yesterday, the Prime Minister was mum on that one, saying he wouldn't preempt advice expected from a strategic review being conducted by former Defence Minister Stephen Smith and former Defence Chief Angus Houston. The government expects to receive the report next month and will also look at how Australia can shift defence strategies from traditional land-based conflict to modern warfare, from missile defence through to cyber security. Mr. Albanese also hinted that Medicare will undergo a major overhaul, saying it's been struggling to keep up. Strengthening Medicare is among the government's highest priorities, but Mr. Albanese hinted that the government plans to share the load of primary care in a blended system. What that might mean is that nurses and pharmacists may get an expanded role to take the load off doctors. That, of course, will trigger some sort of skirmish between those groups. Anyway, something to look forward to.
All right. Now, superannuation funds are set to deliver a negative return for only the fourth time since the year 2000. This is after markets fell across the board last year.
The median balanced fund returned negative 4.8% for the 12 months through to the end of December, with property and equities to blame for much of the decline. According to Research House Super Ratings, only 2 balanced option funds delivered positive returns last year, one from Perpetual and one from First Super. The nation's largest super fund, Aussie Super, its balanced fund delivered a minus 4.8% return, which is right on what the market did. Now, balanced funds typically allocate up to 60-70% of their portfolio in equities, up to about 30 or 40% in bonds, but both asset classes went backwards last year. So too did international equities and, as I mentioned earlier, property. In fact, it was the second worst performance since 2000, though nowhere near as bad as 2008's 20% fall. Michael, no one likes to see their super balance diminish. Fair enough. But super is a long-term game. And since 2000, super returns for balanced funds have averaged plus 6.1%. Keep that in mind when you open that envelope or open that email this time around.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to get professional advice if you are making investment decisions. Sean, CommSec has released its first State of the States report for 2023, and it shows that Queensland is the top performing state. Now, that's the first time that's happened since the report's inception back in 2013.
Correct. Queensland has benefited from population growth, the solid jobs market, and buoyant overseas demand for energy resources, stuff like coal and natural gas. The tourism sector is also doing well. Obviously, it had some tough years during COVID, but it's picked up again. Queensland is now ahead of Tasmania, which drops from first to second. South Australia has lifted from fifth to third. New South Wales is in joint fourth spot with Victoria, ahead of the ACT, Western Australia, and the Northern Territory. Now, the report thinks about things like economic growth, retail spending, unemployment, population growth, the property market, puts all that together to create these rankings, and it's got quite a good track record.
Now, this next one, Sean, will not surprise anybody who has done grocery shopping recently. Food prices surged at Woolies and Coles supermarkets during the December quarter, jumping an average of 9% on an annualised basis.
Do you, when you go shopping, Michael, have a product or two that you judge prices on? So I'll give you my example. When I walk into my local Woolies or Coles, I always end up walking in the area where the fresh food is. And bananas, we eat a lot of bananas in our house. At the moment, they're around $4 a kilo, which is actually on the medium to high side. But it's always like, the first sticker I see are bananas, and it kind of tells me whether it's going to be an expensive or not so expensive shop. Totally spurious what I'm saying, but it's just kind of how I think about it.
It makes sense. And have you seen the cost of potato chips lately? Obviously, with the potato shortages.
Oh, really?
Your average cost of a bag of Smith's Original, which are the best chips of all, has shot up. They were on special the other day for like $4 or something. And $4 is normally kind of that's a steep price for a bag of chips.
Yeah.
And so I just thought that's extraordinary. So now the chips are the first thing I check.
Right. So you do actually have something that kind of triggers your mood when you go into a supermarket.
Yes, chips.
Did you know also I've become a pescatarian over the holidays?
Is that someone who only eats fish?
Well, it's like basically vegetarian plus fish.
Oh.
And I'm just trying it. I don't plan to stick to it by any means. 2.5 weeks in, though, I'm really missing steak, got to tell you.
Can you just pretend that you're eating steak? Like if you're eating a particularly tough piece of salmon, can you just go, yeah. If I close my eyes, it's kind of steaky.
It's not going to last. Anyway, we digress. As you were saying, food prices have surged at Woolies and Coles. In fact, investment bank UBS tracks the prices of more than 60,000 items and found that prices rose most in the fresh food category, led by dairy and meat. UBS analyst Sean Cousins reportedly said there's substantial cost pressure for manufacturers and producers, and dry grocery products will keep rising until at least June. I reckon that potato chips would be a dry grocery product, Michael.
I suspect you might be right. They do feel like quite a niche kind of thing. And you see it, I saw it at the pub the other day that they are not selling any potato wedges at the moment.
Is that right?
Because of this national shortage. I know you don't really care because you don't eat hot chips and you're un-Australian, but I mean, many of us do.
Old and overweight. I think that's probably a better description.
That's also the reason, maybe. I'm not going to say it. You said it. Jetstar, Sean, is the most likely airline to cancel your flight, or at least it was in December, with 7.2% of flights cancelled.
Yes, and at Virgin, it was 1 in 10 or 5%. Qantas cancelled 2.7% of flights. And for Regional Express, Rex, it was 0.7%. Qantas and Rex were the most punctual airlines, with more than 3/4 of each carrier leaving on time. About 1/3 of Virgin departures were late, and only 60% of Jetstar's flights took off on time. Now, according to the Bureau of Transport and Regional Economics, across carriers, nearly 1 in 10 flights on the busy Melbourne-Sydney route was cancelled during December. It was 1 in 11 flights on the Sunshine Coast Sydney route, and Sydney-Canberra also had an overbias of cancellations as well.
Any more fallout, Sean, from the Qantas flights that have been forced to turn around over the last week?
Well, I mean, since last Wednesday, at least 5 flights have had to turn back or signalled distress, including a Mayday call on an Auckland-Sydney flight last week. All landed safely. Qantas's domestic and international boss, Andrew David, was out yesterday. He told 2GB Radio that pilots were trained to err on the side of caution, and that's exactly what happened. I suppose the flip side to that is it's better that they err on the side of caution than otherwise, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Sean, the days of used car prices rising, not falling, are over, with used vehicle prices down about 12% since May and expected to fall another 10% this year.
But Michael, if you're buying a used car, you're still paying about 50% more than pre-pandemic, according to Moody's Analytics. With the supply of new vehicles improving and expected to continue to do so, used car prices are under pressure. Add to that a likely fall in demand from higher interest rates and living cost rises, and maybe it's better to wait a few months before jumping into the market and buying a second-hand vehicle. Interestingly, used electric vehicle prices are also falling and have done so for 7 months, albeit modestly.
All right, now moving on to overseas news now, Sean. A top health official in China estimates that 1.1 billion people have been infected since the dismantling of COVID controls late last year.
The latest data suggests about 60,000 people a month are dying from the disease, though officials are under fire for narrowing the definition of what a COVID death is. They're saying only deaths from respiratory failure should be included. The World Health Organization has urged Beijing to release more detailed information on the COVID situation. The country's chief epidemiologist said that 80% of the population have been infected in the current outbreak. Now, there's 1.4 billion people in China. That gives you the 1.1 billion figure. He also said he didn't expect a large-scale second nationwide outbreak due to the current Lunar New Year celebrations where people are moving around a lot. That, I suppose, is the good news.
And finally, Sean, the suspect in a ballroom dance club shooting near LA that left 10 people dead has taken his own life.
Yes, the 72-year-old man was found in a van that he had used to flee as police officers closed in after an attempted second shooting. It occurred at Monterey Park, which is about 16 kilometres east of Los Angeles. It has a population of around 60,000 people, roughly 2/3 of whom are Asian, according to Bloomberg. Saturday's Lunar New Year celebration had drawn a large crowd to the area. Videos posted on social media showed people being loaded onto stretchers and placed into ambulances. The motive for the crime remains unclear.
All right. Now, up next, Sean, is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. We spoke about it earlier with Zeb Rice, founding partner of King River Capital.
Cryptos, Web 3.0, investing in tech stocks or tech companies. It's all there in the interview with Zeb. Well worth a listen.
And if you listen carefully, you can actually hear the exact moment when finally it starts to make sense to you, Sean.
Oh, I'm surprised there is a moment that it totally made sense to me.
You have to listen very carefully to hear it.
I'll have to go back and listen to it again.
Yep, it's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Tuesday, the 24th of January, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.